We are your official Wildcat and Lady Cat station, KSST 1230 AM, Sulphur Springs. It's time for Wildcat Soccer. Let's go out to Gerald Prim Stadium, where tonight's game is called by KSST Sports Director Don Julian. Don?
James Terry, thank you very much, and welcome everyone into Gerald Prim Stadium, where we have district soccer in an important game tonight between the Wildcats of Sulphur Springs and the Tigers of Mount Pleasant. Tigers are the #1 team in the district. They're perfect 8-0 coming in, and the Wildcats of Sulphur Springs are 4-4, and they are currently the fourth playoff seed. And they certainly would like to climb up in the standings, and to help them do that would be a big win over a team above them in the standings. That would be these Mount Pleasant Tigers. But beating Mount Pleasant has been very, very tough, and you have no idea how tough. I believe, if my research is correct, that we have not beaten Mount Pleasant since 2006. I believe that to be correct. And they have won, probably close to 20 straight games against the Wildcats. And that's a streak that goes way back. When I first started here at KSST, one of the very first sport that we covered after I got here was Andy Holt Soccer back in '06. And Andy had just completed a district campaign where the Wildcats, that '06 team, were the district champions. And that included 2 victories over Mount Pleasant. So Andy owned them in '06. And it does not, the Wildcat season ultimately ended with a loss to Mount Pleasant in probably about the 4th round of the playoffs. I guess that was a regional quarterfinal game on a windy day in Greenville, as I recall. And that started a terrible streak that continues to this day. So Mount Pleasant has just racked up victory after victory. Now, the one thing that might break things up would be tournament play, because I know for a fact, but again, I do not think that there would be anything resembling a victory, but there might be some ties. I know there have been some ties in there. I remember not too many years ago, Coach Wiggins and the Wildcats tied Mount Pleasant in a tournament, and they did that maybe 2 or 3 times over those 13 years, but have not beaten the Mount Pleasant Tigers in that long time span. So that would be a historic moment if that was to happen tonight for Alexi Upton and these Wildcats. They came very, very close the first time these two teams played, and that was back, I think, on February 18th and 19th, somewhere in there.
Stadium for tonight's district matchup.
Here's Coach Neal. Let's stop my yammering and check in with Coach Josh Neal. As he'll be introducing
tonight's lineup for Mount Pleasant Tigers.
And the
Number 1, Matthew Sutherland. Number 2, Alejandro Patino. Number 2, Giselle Yepes. Number 4, Jamie Villarreal. Number 5, Brian Ramirez. Number 6, Edgar Ramirez. Number 7, Marcus Perez. Number 8, William Jensen. Number 9, Alex Diaz. Number 10, Manuel Rosas. Number 11, Osmar Jimenez. Number 12, Tony Freer. Number 13, Osvaldo Benitez. Number 14, Francisco Iquawa. Number 18, Norberto Salazito. 19, Alex Guzman. Number 20, Eduardo Ramirez. Number 21, Joseph Gongora. Number 22, Eduardo Trejo. Coaches Jason Mayfield, Jesus Garcia, Hugo Uribe, and David Zalavidar. Now the lineup for your Sulphur Springs Wildcat. Number 0, Elazar Brenna. 00, Noe Ponce. Number 1, Andrew Escobar. Number 2, Omar Hernandez. Number 3, Bryant Sanchez. Number 4, Jose Salazar. Number 5, Isaac Gutierrez. Number 6, Navian Ramirez. Number 7, Enrique Arellano. Number 8, Kevin Yanez. Number 10, Miguel Rubio. Number 11, Alexis Escobedo. Number 12, David Moreno. Number 13, Christian Palomino. Number 15, Alfredo Vargas. Number 16, Ricardo Torres. Number 17, Matthew Johnson. Number 18, Daniel Moreno. Number 19, Christian Ramirez. Number 21, Manuel Esparza. Number 23, Alejandro Diosado. Number 25, Joel Vasquez. Coached by Alexi Upton. Now would you please stand and remove your hats as we honor our nation with the playing of our national anthem.
That's our national anthem here at Gerald Prim Stadium. Hope you're able to hear that okay. It was a little bit faint, but we may have sounded better to you than to maybe in my headphones, just kind of a little bit low here tonight. But anyway, we're ready to go and introduce both squads here. And now they center circle meetings going on to decide which direction each team will be heading and who gets the ball first and all that stuff. Wildcats look like they were represented by Noe Ponce and also Daniel Marino, or David Marino, I should say. And the officials still out at the center, getting themselves organized while the teams huddle up around their coaching staff. For these final few minutes before we get started here at Gerald Prim Stadium, 2 40-minute halves here in this district ball game. Again, Mount Pleasant 8-0 for the district season, and the Wildcats at 4-4. And it's been a tough climb for Alexi's bunch to get over the 500 mark. I think they started with a loss the very first game. And it looks like they've been at 500, but maybe not above. I do not see a time this season that they were actually above. So this is kind of a high water mark, 9-9-2. As I look back through, they were 5-5-2 after they beat Melissa back on February 8th. We did that ball game. And then you have to go back to 2-2-1 when they way back. Actually, there's one. 2-1-1 after they beat New Summerfield back in a Longview tournament. So they actually have been above 500 this year, back at 2-1-1. Right now, 9-9-2 and 4-4 in district play. But not expected to get points tonight. This is one they would be the underdog. And then what could be a very, very tough contest at Royce City coming up on Tuesday night. And that's a game that they won here at the Prim. It was a tight one. And Royce City plays very, very well at home. I think I was talking to Coach Mayfield before this contest, and he was talking about how that his team was not playing all that well, and they had only won 1-0 over Royce City. Where everybody's in place now, the Wildcats will start with possession of the ball, and they put it in play into their defense back to Yanez. He kicks over to Omar Hernandez. Yanez back to Hernandez, and the ball knocked out of bounds by Mount Pleasant. Throw in for the Wildcats. Just underway here from Gerald Prim Stadium. For the radio crowd, Wildcats heading left to right across the dial. Wildcats have possession of the ball with Rubio. Left-footed kick down the field, intercepted by the Tigers. They send it across to the middle and down into the defense. David Ramirez. Got to get that right. David Marino, how about that? How about that, getting that right? Now the ball here on the near touchline. Escobar had it, gets it over to Rubio, sends it down to Kevin Yanez. Yanez breaking in, sends Escobar down the right side, see if he can keep it in bounds. He does, but when he arrived at the ball, he kicked it, and it went across the end line, so a goal kick for Mount Pleasant. And the Tigers keeper has that ball down on the ground, and he puts a supercharged kick into it. Nice header by the Wildcats. That header was done by Jose Salazar. Ball down the field for Mount Pleasant, and they will send it to the near touchline and kick it down into the Wildcats defense, and they'll let it roll all the way to Ponce. And Noe Ponce will kick it out of there, and he gets a nice punt, but a great header by Mount Pleasant off of a Wildcat player. That's Salazar. And here come the Tigers trying to advance. The Wildcats break that up. One of the Wildcats bowled over there, and the foul will be called on Mount Pleasant. And Yanez quickly puts it in play to Hernandez. And now the ball right at the midline, grappling for possession. And Salazar got it. Gets it back to Hernandez. He kicks to the middle of the field to Rubio. Rubio gets by a Mount Pleasant player. Lots of contact in there. And the Wildcats break out of there with the ball, and here comes Rubio. He'll send a player down to the left side. This is, Enrique Arellano kicked it. It just was deflected by the keeper just to the right of the post. Nice effort there by Enrique. And it'll set up a goal kick for the Wildcats at 37-13.
Corner kick, Wildcats.
And Kevin Yanez will take the corner kick. It'll be to our right and on the near side here. And Yanez will use the left foot on this from the corner. And here is the kick on the way, and headed to the right of the goal. And now kicked out of there. Yanez trying to chase it down, lets it go across the touchline. Throw in for the Wildcats. Got it into Escobedo.
Throw in Wildcats.
And then knocked out of bounds by the Tigers. Osvaldo Benitez. Here's a throw in now for Andrew Escobar. It's in the corner of the box. Wildcat or Mount Pleasant trying to head it out. The Wildcats a left-footed kick toward the goal. Mount Pleasant high in the air. It's right on the near touchline, and across the touchline it goes. A Mount Pleasant player
throw in for the Wildcats.
Trying to work his way down the field. That was Tony Freer. Tony looks like he plays some football or something. He is a muscled person. He may be a power lifter or something. He really, really looks strong. Throw to the right side of the box. Wildcats trying to get in there for the ball. Real hard effort there, but the officials say too much effort out of that Wildcat player. I think that was Escobedo. And yes, so Alexis Escobedo. So here's the free kick for Mount Pleasant. They'll send it down around the midline. Nice header by Rubio. Mount Pleasant back into the defense. And further back into the defense as they kick it around back there on the defensive side, right out in front of their own goal. They continue to pass that ball around. And Mount Pleasant not particularly getting the ball out of their end, but they're making some effective passes. Here's an interception by Omar Hernandez. Omar looking for a friendly face, gets it over to Salazar. Salazar really tested on that far touchline and out of bounds off Mount Pleasant. Throw in for the Wildcats at 34-45. Throw over to Rubio. And the Wildcats trying to move it up the field. Salazar had it taken away by Mount Pleasant. They'll kick it deep, and Ponce will get it inside the 18. And he will now punt the ball and gets a nice high punt. Boy, that was a tremendous kick all the way down around only about 30 yards out of the Mount Pleasant goal. Probably about 20 or 30 yards past the midline. Mount Pleasant has it on the far touchline. They'll kick a little bit toward the middle of the field. And further down, Freer's got it. He's moving in. Kicks back to a teammate, goes back to Brian Ramirez. Sends it to the touchline. The Wildcats take it away to Andrew Escobar, but Mount Pleasant gets it back. Freer holding him off and kicked on the goal. That was a hot shot, about a two-hopper into Noe Ponce. And Ponce will now punt for the Wildcats. And a header added onto it for nice distance for the Wildcats. They chase as the ball's passed around the Mount Pleasant defense. They work it over to Osvaldo Benitez. He's kicked to the middle of the field. And here come the Tigers. They'll kick to the right side of the box. And the Wildcats will let this one roll all the way across the end line for a goal kick for the Wildcats. 33:09 left in the first half. Mount Pleasant Tigers 0, Wildcats of Sulphur Springs 0. District 15 5A soccer here from Gerald Prim Stadium. Home of the Wildcats. I read it right on the side of the building here. There's a kick up to the midline. And Mount Pleasant's Freer is putting on the pressure and taken away by Sanchez, but Mount Pleasant threatened to get it back, but now Escobar has it. Kicked off Mount Pleasant players over toward Yanez. He sends it further down the field. And Salazar kicks it down the field, taken by Mount Pleasant. Wildcats defense comes up. Now the ball sent over near the touchline, goes out of bounds. It'll be a Mount Pleasant throw-in right by their bench area. 0-0 here at 32-13 here from Gerald Prim Stadium. We're still in the first 10 minutes. Ball is thrown in and headed out of bounds by the Wildcats. Throw in again by the Tigers of Mount Pleasant, coached by Jason Mayfield. 18 years the head coach of the Mount Pleasant Tigers, and had some quality teams, some real good ones. And this is a good one. There's a foul against Mount Pleasant. The Wildcats will have a free kick inside the 18. And Noe Ponce from the ground will put the foot into it, and it's a nice kick. And a nice header added on to it there by Yanez. Mount Pleasant has it in the defensive end. They kick to the near touchline. Escobar putting on a lot of heat. Now the ball comes down to the middle. Wildcats get it to Yanez. He gets it back to Rubio. And his kick over to Omar Hernandez. Omar to the center of the field, but Mount Pleasant gets there. And they'll try the near touchline here. And there's a deep kick by Mount Pleasant. A nice header by the Wildcats defender. And Salazar works it to Hernandez. But Mount Pleasant comes up and they get the ball and they quickly move to offense as they send it to a player in the middle of the field. Bumped by a Wildcat defender, but kicked back to another Mount Pleasant player. And they'll work it to the hash line, and now the Wildcats kick it out of there. And Mount Pleasant will kick it back into the defense and regroup. And there's a pass up to Brian Ramirez. And they work it, they'll try the far touchline. A player racing in past a Wildcat defender, and the defender got tripped up. He was clearly in the box. And we may see a penalty kick here as the Wildcats defender kind of clipped that player that had the advantage on him and knocked him off his feet, and it's going to call for a penalty kick here.
Penalty kick for the Tigers.
And we'll see who they depend on. They're going to depend on Alex Guzman. So Guzman for the penalty kick for Mount Pleasant. So Noe Ponce on the spot. Here's Guzman approaches, and the kick is in the net. Ponce went to the left. The kick went to the right,
for the Tigers,
or his 19, right.
Alex Guzman.
And Alex Guzman, the goal on the PK. Boy, that's a tough break to get a PK in a big ball game like this. At 30-12. So the goal for Alex Guzman on the penalty kick. Matthew Johnson comes in, and he will replace Miguel Rubio. Omar Hernandez also coming out, and I did not see the other player that came in, but I'm sure we'll find him out quickly here. Oh, I found him real quick. That's Isaac Gutierrez is now in there. Over to Escobedo. Here comes Escobedo. He kicks down toward Escobar. That's too far for him and went across the end line. Goal kick for Mount Pleasant.
Goal kick for the Tigers.
Just trying to get an idea who that keeper might be. Oh, okay, number 1. That's Matthew Sunderland is the keeper for Mount Pleasant. They have kickers 1, 2, or keepers 1, 2, and 4, and this is number 1. Kick down the field, out of the goal, and here comes Mount Pleasant on the offense. They lead 1-0 after the successful penalty kick. Have a player coming in from the right side. Good Wildcats defense back there. And a whistle blows and foul on Mount Pleasant. Wildcats will get a free kick back there. And this is Nabian Ramirez on the free kick for the Wildcats. Puts the foot into it. Comes down to Yanez. It's on that far touchline. Here comes Mount Pleasant in a big hurry. They'll kick toward the keeper, and Ponce comes up and grabs it right in front of Freer there, who was on the move. Yeah, I think if Freer was a football player, I think I'd find a spot at like linebacker for that guy. He's a rugged-looking customer. And quick and looks strong. Mount Pleasant back in their defense. And here come the Tigers. They get across the midline. Wildcats trying to pry it out of there, and player knocked over.
Free kick, Wildcats.
And the Wildcats are fouled, and they'll get a free kick. That was Yanez. And Kevin will kick it a little bit further towards Salazar. And he finds Gutierrez, and back to Yanez. Yanez again knocked off his feet. This time they let him play. Freer has it, a deep kick, but it'll go all the way to Noe. Ponce. And Noyes gets another beautiful punt out of there, and another header by Yanez to send it another 10 yards. But an equally good header by Mount Pleasant. There's Isaac Gutierrez. Ball pried loose by Mount Pleasant. This is Freer again. He works it over to Brian Ramirez. Comes to the touch line, and now here comes Mount Pleasant. They'll kick toward the center. They found Freer in there. Maybe or one of the Wildcats, Gutierrez, pried it loose. Mount Pleasant got it back. Freer kicking it back, and Mount Pleasant passing around there. Brian Ramirez comes over to the near touchline, and they'll kick deep. It's in the 18-yard box, and Ponce will grab that one. Now, I have heard some people refer to him as Ponce, and as a football player, I've never heard him referred to as anything but Noe Ponce. So if that is not correct, it'd be nice to know that if somebody can provide the answer to that. But that's what he's been called as a backup quarterback for the football team.
Throw in,
Noe
Tigers.
Ponce. So here's the ball again in the defensive end from Mount Pleasant. They'll send it to the far touchline. 26-34. Wildcats trailing 1-0, and now we have a foul on the Wildcats. Mount Pleasant player just now picking himself up. This is from about 45 yards out, and they'll chip it toward the goal and head it out by the Wildcats. Another header out of there, chested down for the Wildcats, Yanez, and then down the field toward Enrique Arellano, went out of bounds, throw in for Mount Pleasant. Tigers throw it in on the far touchline, pried away by the Wildcats, but Mount Pleasant gets it back. And again, they work that far touchline. Mount Pleasant player falls, and they'll have the Mount Pleasant throw in. Wildcats thought they were going to get that one, but Mount Pleasant got it. And so now a Mount Pleasant throw in. And near the edge of the box, Wildcats headed out of there. Ball down on the ground on the far touchline. Pried loose by the Wildcats to Yanez. Sends it back toward Matthew Johnson, and then it's knocked out of bounds by Mount Pleasant. Throw in for the Wildcats, 25-19 left, first half. Substitution coming in for the Wildcats is Ricardo Torres. He'll replace Andrew Escobar. Throw in for the Wildcats on the far touchline. Comes up to Salazar. And here come the Wildcats, but broken up by Mount Pleasant's defense. And the Wildcats got it back. And here's Isaac Gutierrez. He sends it down the field, has a player right out in front, really giving Mount Pleasant some trouble down there, trying to get off a shot. Back to Gutierrez, left-footed kick, went off a Mount Pleasant player. The Wildcats trying to line up for a shot. They keep getting blocked, and now the keeper is running traffic out there, trying to tell his players where to kick the ball. The Wildcats get it back, but now they're out from the goal quite a bit. But they continue to maneuver in. Pried loose, sent back to Brian Hernandez. No, that's not right. Bryant Sanchez, excuse me. And here's a deep kick by Mount Pleasant, and Sanchez goes back and has it on the near touchline. Works it off of Gutierrez. Right on that touchline, taken away from Arellano, though. And Freer will find a teammate. That is Jahil Yapez. And a kick toward Freer again. He's trying to open for a shot. Gets it further down the field to the edge of the box. Wildcats trying to get it out of there. They head over to the touchline. Wildcats still trying to pry it loose, and now it goes across the touchline. Last touch by the Wildcats. Throw in for Mount Pleasant at 23-36. Mount Pleasant leads 1-0. They had a successful penalty kick at 30-12. We thank Jason Mayfield for approving our live stream tonight, acting on behalf of his administration because they're all on spring break. We appreciate him. He said we could do everything we wanted to do here, so we appreciate that. Mount Pleasant in toward the goal, and Wildcats trying to get it out of there. They get it up to Enrique Arellano. He sends it down the field, and Escobedo's chasing. But Mount Pleasant sent it back in their defense, and now they'll bring it to the near touchline. And now back toward the center of the field. Wildcats, Yanez tried to get it back, but Mount Pleasant continues with possession. Deep down the field, broken up by the Wildcats defense. Here is Escobedo on the fly. Escobedo knocked off the ball. A whistle blows a foul on Mount Pleasant. This will be out about 45 yards. And the Wildcats put it in play to Isaac Gutierrez, trying to open for a shot. Got a little bit on it, but not much. Blocked down by Mount Pleasant. Nice header by the Wildcats. And a good job of protecting the ball there by the Wildcats. They'll send it down the right side. This is Ricardo Torres. Oh, a tremendous collision down there, and they let him play through that. There was a lot of contact, real physical play there that the official let go. And Mount Pleasant now trying to come out of their defensive end. They send it to the middle, down toward Freer. He sends it toward the touchline. Oh, a sliding play by the Wildcats that pried the ball loose. Freer is slow to get up, but did not get that call. Now Mount Pleasant has a player racing in, broken up by the Wildcats defense. And the Wildcats with a series of headers get it up around the midline. And again, Mount Pleasant back into their defense to get things going. They'll pass around that defense. They're very good at that. Send it to the middle across the midline, down toward Freer. He's good with those arms and hands of keeping players away from him. He'll send a player to the right side of the box, and it went too far and went across the end line. Goal kick for the Wildcats. 21:05 left here in the first half, and the Wildcats trail 1-0 on a penalty kick again after about 10 minutes of play, just short of 10. And now a long conversation between the on-field official there and Freer, who did not like that sliding tackle, but the player came away with the ball, and I think that's a key aspect of it. Out for the Wildcats, Jose Salazar and also Enrique Arellano, as the ball kicked into the Mount Pleasant defense. Wildcats chasing, but Mount Pleasant awfully good passing among their defenders. And they continue to kick across the field down to the far touchline. Nice passing game by Mount Pleasant. The Wildcats have it back. And they get it back to Yanez. Finds a teammate over there. Back to Kevin Yanez. Kind of hemmed in by the Mount Pleasant defense. Wildcats player trying to go right along the far touchline, and out of bounds it goes. Throw in for Mount Pleasant as we dip under 20 minutes here. We played half of the first half, and Mount Pleasant leads 1-0. A goal by Alex Guzman on a penalty kick after one of the Mount Pleasant players was fouled in the box. He did have an advantage, and he was kind of clipped and hit the ground. When I say clipped, I mean in the upper body, and that was a foul in the box, and that set up the penalty kick. Mount Pleasant with the ball pried loose by Gutierrez, and here comes Yanez. Tried to send it down the field, broken up, but Gutierrez sends it further down to Omar Hernandez, but kicked out of there by the Wildcat, or by the Tigers. And this is Escobedo. Escobedo sends it down the near touchline. Ooh, a real collision there. Omar Hernandez knocked over one of the Mount Pleasant players, and again they let that go. So they're allowing a lot of contact in this game. Mount Pleasant on the attack, broken up by the Wildcats. Bryant Sanchez, a good job, and then he got dumped, and they will call that. No, they're waving that off. Boy, the crowd did not like that. Here's a Mount Pleasant player out in front, and the Wildcats chasing him around there, and they pried the ball loose, and the Wildcats try to get it up the field, but Mount Pleasant comes right back down to Freer, and he sends it there to the edge of the 18-yard box. Here's a kick off of a Wildcat blocked, and the Wildcats trying to get it out of there. They kick to the far touchline, and they continue to maneuver it there, and went off of a Mount Pleasant player and out of bounds. A throw in for the Wildcats, but hold everything as a whistle sounds. They're going to stop for a substitution as Andrew Escobar checks back in. He'll replace Matthew Johnson. And so we await that substitution. And now we're ready for a Wildcat throw-in on the far touchline. Off of a Wildcat player with a header. Wildcats maneuvering in. They're on that far touchline, kicked out of there by Mount Pleasant. Wildcats pry it loose back into Mount Pleasant territory. Very physical Wildcat team tonight. Trying to match the physicality, I'm sure, of Mount Pleasant. Here come the Tigers with the ball. They kick it downfield. Freer finds a teammate broken up by the Wildcats. Here's Rubio. Sends it down the field. Comes to, that is Diastado. And now taken back by Mount Pleasant. Nice interception there by Isaac Gutierrez. Isaac gets the ball further down the field. A player maneuvering in. Diastado knocked off his feet. They let that go. And Wildcat still trying to get it back. Now Mount Pleasant will kick it up the field toward Freer. He chests the ball down, gets it right in his feet with a lot of skill to do that. Kicks the ball up the field. Wildcats back checking Yanez on the Mount Pleasant players, but they maintain control and kick to the far touchline. Goes through players, intercepted by the Wildcats. David Marino. And now kicked on the far touchline. Mount Pleasant has it. And they're passing among the defenders and trying to come out of their defensive end across the midline. Down the field it goes. Intercepted by the Wildcats. This is Rubio. Rubio now over to Escobar. He kicks it back to the Wildcats and it goes down the field and further down to Yanez. Tried to get it back over to the touchline. That's Andrew Escobar. Escobar went nicely around one of the Mount Pleasant players. His kick was blocked, but the Wildcats got it back. They'll find a player. That's Gutierrez in the middle of the field. He's knocked off the ball. Comes over to the near touchline. Gutierrez still fighting in there. Comes loose, and here's Omar Hernandez. Omar, he sent it to the right side. That was too strong for the Wildcat player to get to. He knocked over the flag. He was flying so fast trying to get to that ball. But it'll be Mount Pleasant with a throw-in deep in their own territory. If we're at 15-28, Wildcats trailing 1-0. Mount Pleasant again, a goal on a penalty kick at 30-12. Guzman got it. Here's a throw-in for the Wildcats, for Mount Pleasant. And comes to Bryant Sanchez. He gets it to Yanez. And now the Wildcats chip it in toward the edge of the 18, and Mount Pleasant will kick it out of bounds. Clear it out of there. Throw in for the Wildcats. And see if we can spy who's going to do the throwing in there. Ricardo Torres will throw in for the Wildcats. At 14:48, Torres into the box, headed by the Wildcats down to a player in closer. A bicycle kick. Oh my, a great save by the keeper there, Sunderland, for Mount Pleasant. Oh my, that would have been a highlight goal there on a bicycle kick that was right on goal. One of the Wildcats, I'm sorry that I cannot identify the player that did that. That would have been a super goal. And here comes the Mount Pleasant Tigers. I bet you watch the replay, you can figure out who did that. And Mount Pleasant up the field. The Wildcats trying to get the ball back. They pry it loose from Freer. It's up around the midline, and Mount Pleasant again back into the defense to get things going. Wildcats really tough back checking, and they take the ball away. They kick the ball down the field. Have Omar Hernandez. Hernandez moving in. The left-footed kick. Oh, too much juice on that one. And it was well over the goal by Omar Hernandez. He really had the energy level up for that, and he just got a tremendous kick into that way over the goal. So a goal kick now from the edge of the 6-yard box. And there's the kick out of there by Mount Pleasant. Goes off players. Freer kicks it to the side. The Wildcats bang it down the field. And the Wildcats get it down toward Hernandez. He's knocked off his feet. Goes over to the near touchline, and Mount Pleasant kicks it up the field toward Sanchez. He goes back and gets it and goes back to David Marino. Marino still has possession, gets it over to Torres. Down the field, Sanchez knocked off his feet again. Alexi Upton says, hey, trying to get the official's attention, thought his player really got foul there. And all that was let go, and then looks like Omar has to tie a shoe here. And Upton in the official's ear, and he kind of said, okay, enough, I heard you. And the Wildcats did get a foul, so they will get the free kick here, Kevin Yanez. It's about 55 yards out and right on the near touchline. There's a strong kick by Yanez, headed high in the air. The keeper, Sunderland, will reach above everybody and grab the ball for Mount Pleasant. 12:22 left here in the first half. The Wildcats are trailing 1-0. What I would like to see tonight, this is like the Lindale game where the Wildcats were behind, but here comes Mount Pleasant putting on some pressure. The ball swept toward the goal, but a good defensive play there by one of the Wildcats. That was Andrew Escobar, who cleared that ball out of the way. I'll make sure that's him. I may have misidentified. Oh, that is Sanchez, excuse me. It looked like him. That's why I thought I saw a 1, but it was a 3. I know that sounds weird, but sometimes these numbers are a little hard to read, but that was Bryant Sanchez that scooped that ball or kicked it out of harm's way. Now here's a corner kick, Mount Pleasant. The Wildcats trying to get it out. And good block there by the Wildcats. Mount Pleasant had some good shots on goal. Now a player moving up with time and space is shot, but he really ripped that one. It was kind of to the right and went well over the goal and
goal kick, Wildcats.
Way out of play. So it'll be a goal kick for the Wildcats at 11-13. Mount Pleasant 1, Wildcats 0. And again, as I was saying, similar to that Lindale game, get behind and then come roaring back. They were down 2-0 in that one. Not that I want them to get behind to Mount Pleasant 2-0. That would be a big hill to climb, but they did against Lindale and came all the way back in Lindale to win 3-2. Actually, that game was at Tyler Junior College because Lindale is still having their football field updated, which also where soccer's played. Foul on Mount Pleasant after the free kick, and Yanez will send it over to Salazar. And Salazar still trying to maintain possession, but he was bumped off the ball, and here comes Mount Pleasant. They'll send it down the left touchline. Player flying in there against the defense. He was bumped off the ball, and they're going to let that go. The Mount Pleasant player is still down after being knocked over. The ball right on the near touchline. The players holding on to each other there. They let all that go, and they set out of bounds off of the Wildcats. So a throw in for Freer and Mount Pleasant. And there's the throw in, and it goes all the way through and across the end line. So a goal kick for the Wildcats at 9:50. And Noe Ponce with a kick out of the goal. There's Noe's kick. Mount Pleasant header, chested down by the Wildcats. But here comes the Tigers on the attack. They kick it down the field. The Wildcats break it up. Players exchanging kicks. Wildcats trying to get out of there with it, but Mount Pleasant pried it loose. A player in the middle of the field kind of waltzing through there. Gets it to Freer. He draws a lot of attention. Taken away by Yanez. And whistle will blow everything dead. A foul on Mount Pleasant. Free kick for the Wildcats. And it looks like everybody's falling away. They're going to let Noe Ponce get the free kick here. And there's Noe's kick on the way out into Mount Pleasant territory. Off players and heading up toward the midline where Freer will get it. Tried to get it and go. Taken away by the Wildcats. Sanchez, right to a Mount Pleasant player. He sends it to the middle of the field. Brian Ramirez. And Mount Pleasant in toward the goal. Broken up by Sanchez nicely, and he sends it down the field to Omar Hernandez. Omar toward Yanez, then knocked out of bounds by Mount Pleasant.
Throw in Wildcats.
And throw in for the Wildcats, Yanez. And he will defer now to Ricardo Torres for the throw in. And the throw in for the Wildcats toward the middle of the field, that's Escobedo. Escobedo back toward Torres. He moves it up to Yanez. Yanez coming out of there with it. Found a teammate, and they'll send it back to Sanchez as the Wildcats regroup. Over to Yanez. He turns and moves up the field. Kicks it down the field toward Escobedo. He's got a defender on him as they really grapple there. The Mount Pleasant player fell and
corner kick for the Wildcats.
And then send it across the inline. Goal kick will be coming up for the Wildcats as we go under 7:30 here. And Kevin Yanez will work his way to our right and again on the near side, kind of over there underneath the scoreboard, or just to the, from our perspective, just to the right of the scoreboard. Another left-footed kick coming for Kevin Yanez. And there's a kick. He put a lot into it. It's right out in front, went across the front of the goal, and heads to the right of the, or the left of the 18-yard box. Kicked off of a Wildcat, goes out of bounds, and Mount Pleasant with a throw-in as we're at 6:52 to play here in the first half. Wildcats trail Mount Pleasant 1-0. When they lost in Mount Pleasant back in February, the Wildcats lost 1-0 and played very, very well. It was a very kind of an inspiring effort by the Wildcats just to lose 1-0 to Mount Pleasant. Played with them very tough. Yanez got it down the field, but he was knocked off the ball, and here comes Mount Pleasant. This is Freer moving in with a lot of speed. Oh, they give him some time and space, and he moves around a defender, and then looks like he lost it out of bounds, so it'll be a goal kick for the Wildcats. I wondered if he might not have kicked it off of a Wildcat player, but the official did not rule it that way and said he just lost it out of bounds, as he was just really getting up ahead of steam there. So a goal kick at the edge of the 6 for Noe Ponce. We have 5:53 left in the first half. Mount Pleasant 1 and the Wildcats 0. That was on a successful penalty kick way back at 30-12. Here's the kick out of there by Ponce, and headed by Mount Pleasant, comes off of Salazar, and he kicks it down the field. They'll send it back to the touchline. Knocked off Mount Pleasant players. The Wildcats send it further down the field. Mount Pleasant defender fell. This is Escobedo. He's moving in, grappling with the defender there, trying to maneuver the ball. Got it back to Gutierrez. Works it over to, I believe that's Yanez, and he kicks it down. Here's Andrew Escobar. Escobar slashing in there. The ball knocked away by Mount Pleasant, and they'll clear it up the field. They found Freer down there, just about out of their defensive end. He kicks it down the field. Nice header by the Wildcats over on that far touchline, and now booted down the field, but that'll be right up against and into the visiting stands, so it'll be a Mount Pleasant throw-in. The Tigers actually have some fans down there on the opposite side. We've seen some that we've played that didn't bring any fans with them for that visiting side, but Mount Pleasant has a few fans over there on the visiting side, so they're able to help. And now the throw-in from Mount Pleasant, and they're in their defensive end. Wildcats trying to get it back. They're doing some great back checking tonight, and they pry the ball loose. Wildcats have it right at the midline. Daniel Marino. Or make that David Marino. My goodness. Have a hard time with him for some reason. He's once again David Marino, and kicks it up around the midline. Again, good back checking by the Wildcats. Mount Pleasant will chip the ball into the defensive end. Header by the Wildcats. Settled down by Salazar. And this is Yanez again. Left foots it down the field toward Escobedo. And now Mount Pleasant has it, and they'll kick it into the Wildcats' end. Good play by David Marino. But Mount Pleasant gets it back up around the midline, and again Mount Pleasant will kick back into the defense. 3:37 left here in the second half, or excuse me, the first half, and Wildcats trail 1-0. Guess I try to speed this game up a little bit here, like we're almost through, but that's not the case. We're in the first half. Ball down the field now for the Wildcats. Yanez. Excuse me, that's Escobedo. Now to Yanez. Yanez moving in, knocked off the ball. Hernandez sends it back to Gutierrez, pried away from him. Mount Pleasant up the field. Wildcats trying to get control. Do a good job there with Salazar, but his kick taken by Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant back in the defense. Good interception there by Kevin Yanez. Wildcats seem to be playing this Mount Pleasant team with a lot of vigor tonight. Yanez pass, or the pass, Escobedo's pass, and a misconnection goes out of bounds, and players were talking to each other. Wildcats, Escobedo trying to get it back here. Sends it toward Escobar, but taken by Mount Pleasant. There's a kick by Sanchez. Goes off Alexi Upton and throw in for Mount Pleasant. Just 2:27 left here in the first half. Wildcats are trailing 1-0. Ball on the near touchline. Escobar had the ball, but taken away by Mount Pleasant, and they'll kick across the field. And they'll try the far touchline. Wildcats again really vigorously back checking. Nice job by the Wildcats. That's a point I'd like to talk to Alexi Upton about, is the back checking for the Wildcats. Really vicious tonight, really strong. Here comes Mount Pleasant on the near touchline. Again, you've got to match the intensity of these Tigers. They are very, very good. Oh, the Tigers get loose now in the middle of the field. They kick it across the field. Intercepted by the Wildcats down toward Enrique Arellano, but Mount Pleasant got there first, and they'll kick the ball, and Noe Ponce will watch it roll until it rolls all the way out of bounds on the far touchline and be a goal kick for the Wildcats. Just 1:23 all that's left here in the first half. Mount Pleasant 1, the Wildcats 0. On a busy night for sports in Sulphur Springs. We've got Lady Cat softball, Wildcats baseball also going on all tonight, and they all started softball about 6 and then soccer and baseball at 7. So a busy evening. Here's a deep kick with Mount Pleasant chasing the Wildcats defense, trying to get back, and the kick toward the goal. It went to the left of the goal, as that player was really being pestered by a lot of defenders there. As for Mount Pleasant, that was Marcus Perez. Goal kick for the Wildcats, 40 seconds, all that's left here in the first half. Again, streaming video tonight if you want to check it out. You can, I think there's a link on our website. You can certainly do that through YouTube. Ball comes up the field to Isaac Gutierrez Salazar, and then back. Ooh, kicked off a Mount Pleasant player. Goes to the far side of the field. We have 16 seconds, all that's left. Deep kick for the Wildcats as they try to get something going. I think that's Enrique Arellano. He's got 8 seconds. Got to do something quickly. And Mount Pleasant heads it out of bounds, and that's going to do it for the clock. There's triple zeros right there as the Wildcats try to throw it in. Alexi Upton clapping his hands after that effort by his Wildcats, as he lacked that energy. And I'm telling you, they are really playing Mount Pleasant with a lot of vigor tonight. A lot of energy. They are really, they look like they look when they're playing a team that they overpower, but Mount Pleasant is able to handle it, but they are really putting that kind of pressure on. It's not one of those games where the other team is Mount Pleasant's possessing the ball and not letting them have it. The Wildcats have had that ball a lot. So we're at the half, and Mount Pleasant leads at the end of the first half by the score of 1-0. Again, they got the goal. It was on a penalty kick. The Wildcats had fouled one of the forwards for Mount Pleasant in the 18-yard box. Resulted in a penalty kick successfully done by Alex Guzman at 30-12 to make it 1-0. And that is our scoring here at Gerald Prim Stadium as we played one half of our soccer match. So the teams are, it looks like Mayfield's bunch has gone into the locker room, except some of their keepers. They've got a few players out kicking the ball around. Looks like some maybe backup keepers or something. The Wildcats are right under the scoreboard. We've seen them gather under there before to have halftime. Let's pause right here. We'll come back with more, but let's take a break. We're at the half. It's Mount Pleasant 1 and the Wildcats 0. And back in a moment. Wildcats gathering around Alexi Upton as they get ready for the second half. The Mount Pleasant players are pouring onto the field, and the ones that are not starting are heading over into the bench area. On a relatively pleasant night for soccer, we don't see all the blankets and everything. I mean, people are fairly warmly dressed because it started tonight at 57 degrees with a north wind at 9 miles an hour. So that probably brought the chill factor down to around 49 or 50, you would think, and maybe even lower than that. The humidity's not too bad, 29%. As far as East Texas goes, that's nothing. Very humid place out here in East Texas. Of course, 29% in Amarillo, you'd be talking about something. It's bone dry out there, where Doug is from, where they has the most aptly named town I've ever heard of, No Trees. I think that's right outside Odessa, and it is aptly named. I don't know. I think Doug told me they actually grew a few trees there. That really bummed me out when I heard that. That ruined their whole reputation. Anyway, Mount Pleasant is getting ready to put the ball in play. They'll be traveling left to right across the radio dial. And the Wildcats obviously right to left. But Mount Pleasant now puts the ball back into play, and we're underway here in the second half. Mount Pleasant leading the Wildcats by the score of 1-0. Ball again back into the Mount Pleasant defense. They'll work the near touch line here, and then passing again around that defense. And they continue just the Wildcats chasing vigorously, but Mount Pleasant just from one defender to the next. And now a defender roaring out of there, kicks to the middle of the field, and now kicks back. Mount Pleasant, this kind of looks like a four-corner Dean Smith basketball play where they're stalling for time. Dean Smith, an ancient coach in North Carolina, been a few years. Coach Sipp would know him, I guarantee you. Ball, here comes Mount Pleasant now into Wildcats territory, but taken away by the Wildcats. And Salazar works it over to Rubio, David Marino, but taken away Mount Pleasant. They kick it down the field. The Wildcats get it back. Omar Hernandez with a left foot gets it down to Escobedo. Escobedo back to Omar. Omar putting on some fancy footwork. He kicked it. Oh, he's got a player right out in front trying to turn and shoot. That might have been Yanez. He sends it back, and here's a thundering kick by the Wildcats, but that's way too strong. It went all the way over the inner fence, which is back about 10 yards behind the end line back there. Goal kick from Mount Pleasant at 38-19, and Mount Pleasant leading the Wildcats 1-0. Sulphur Springs header, but it went backwards, and Mount Pleasant now with the ball right at the midline. They'll kick to the middle of the field. Mount Pleasant player burrowing in. They've had a player breaking in, now another player coming in, and they're working it down, but broken up by the Wildcats. Here's a kick toward the goal that went to the left of the goal, as Noe Ponce again going to that post, and then you know when you've gone that far that the ball's not going to beat you, and if it goes past you, it's going to be to your left, or our left here, and it's going to be too far to the side. And ball is coming up. Oh, they're going to put that ball out of play. The official wanted Noe Ponce to use the other ball. So Ponce with a goal kick now for the Wildcats with 37-17 left here in the second half. The kick out of there, headed by Mount Pleasant, and they kick it further down the field, but that'll roll across the near touch line. Throw in for the Wildcats, 37:05 left, second half. Omar Hernandez started. Now he'll throw it in to Yanez. Yanez, Mount Pleasant pries it loose. They'll kick to the middle of the field. The Wildcats get there first, but Mount Pleasant got it back. Now they kick to the Wildcats. Down the field to Escobedo. Escobedo had the ball pried loose. And Mount Pleasant working the near touch line here from their own defense. Now they'll kick it back and they'll regroup. They'll go across the field back on the defense. Up the field it comes. Now a kick toward the middle. Mount Pleasant again in their own defensive end, and they'll try the near touchline to get it across the midline. They'll kick it down the field. Some good passing. A player coming in. He's being leaned on, and he tried to get open for a shot, and the Wildcats sent the ball toward the side. Good defense. They send it up the field. Tried to send a player out of there, but Mount Pleasant gets control. They pass across the field. They look like they're crossing more with their passes, Mount Pleasant. Wildcats, again, back checking over there. Now the ball on the far touchline, now kicked all the way, well, back toward the middle of the field, chipped toward the edge of the 18. Wildcats get it out of there over to Escobedo, and he kicks back in the defense. I think that's Escobar. And now they try to send Escobar out with the ball there. It's on that far touchline. Ball goes out of bounds. Last touch, Mount Pleasant. Escobar with a throw. No, let's see, they'll overrule that. And Mount Pleasant with the throw in. And throws and chested down over there. They're on the far touchline. Get it back into Freer. Freer trying to work his way in. The ball squirted into the 18, and Noe Ponce will take care of that. Noe's been doing a great job on the punting. Wildcats looking for a punter next football season. Of course, he's used to punting that round ball. It, I'm sure, is a different thing to punt that goofy-looking football and in American football. Now Mount Pleasant has the ball back in their own defense, and again they'll work it back to kind of regroup. They'll work the far touchline. 34-38. Ball on that far touchline. And now it goes out of bounds. Quick throw in for the Wildcats. As Wildcats trying to come in over there. Again on that far side, Mount Pleasant takes it away. And the Wildcats back checking there. And now it goes back into the defense. The Wildcats chase and almost got there. Wildcats putting on some pressure now, as Mount Pleasant will kick the ball right to a Wildcat there. Ball comes over to Salazar. Salazar moving in with a lot of speed to the left side of the box. And now he gets it back to Omar Hernandez, who chips it toward the middle. It goes across the field. The Wildcats couldn't quite connect, and it goes over to the far touchline. Then kicked down the field, but David Marino has it, but a whistle blows, and the official will come over after blowing the whistle. And let's see what his call is going to be, as he is warning one of the Wildcats. He sent him away without a card, so just a warning and a foul on the Wildcats and a kick from Mount Pleasant on the far touchline. And a deep kick from Mount Pleasant and a header. But the Wildcats get the header on it. Comes up the field. Mount Pleasant backing into their defense again. They're playing with a 1-0 lead. They bring it across the midline. Player moving in. The Wildcats break that up and kick it back out. Mount Pleasant, though, has it again as they maneuver down toward the goal. They send a player racing in on the left side of the box. It squirts across the end line. Noe Ponce pointed to the goal for a goal kick, but this is going to be a corner kick for Mount Pleasant at 32-46. Mount Pleasant Tigers with a corner kick. It'll be with a left foot, and there it goes toward the goal, and Ponce leaps up into the air. A great athlete that he is. And Noe Ponce made a very athletic play to grab that ball and get it out of harm's way, and then he punts it out of there, headed by Mount Pleasant. Wildcats have it, and they get it back to David Marino, but his kick taken by Mount Pleasant. They try to send a player in. He's screened off. He's moving in, trying to get inside. The Wildcats trying to, another player came in, and yet another one, a third player from Mount Pleasant trying to open up for a shot. The Wildcats swarming all over him, and his kick is blocked and goes all the way over to the far touchline, but Mount Pleasant continuing to put on the pressure. Wildcats clear it out of there nicely. They got it to Yanez. His kick up to Escobedo. Escobedo looking for some help, and he kicks it back toward, I believe that was Nabian Ramirez. Now kicked toward the middle and taken by Salazar. Salazar kicks it down there, but no Wildcats to be found, and right into that Mount Pleasant defense. and they'll just kind of go back and forth with the passing right in the middle, and then a little bit to the right side, and further down the field up near the midline, and then they go across the field. Oh, just some beautiful passing as they work their way up the field. It squirts through Mount Pleasant players. The Wildcats have it over to Salazar, and he works it up to Yanez. He's bumped off the ball by Mount Pleasant. He tried to get it back. There's some back checking by the Wildcats. Again, very fierce, and the official letting a lot of that go. And Mount Pleasant now, though, maneuvering down, but kicked it off a Wildcat, but Freer's got it. Freer with some speed, but taken away by the Wildcats. Again, David Marino. Oh, what a collision. My goodness. What a huge collision, David Marino and one of the Mount Pleasant players, and he's looking for Marino for a yellow card. That looked like an equal play where both of them really ran into each other. And David Marino has been yellow carded here. And now Alexi Upton is demonstrating that the players ran into each other. But of course, that's a great expression, the deaf ear. That's what he got that time from the official. And now even further lobbying going on by Escobedo, and the official kind of probably said, hey, I've ruled and that's it. And so the Wildcats, an appeal that you can't win there. And a free kick for Mount Pleasant, just about the midline. And there's a thundering kick down the field, headed out by the Wildcats. And they try to come out of their defensive end. And here they come. Player moving with a lot of speed. And they'll send it down to Enrique Arellano. Arellano down the field, taken away by Mount Pleasant. Arellano peels back, but now Mount Pleasant will take control, and they'll kick it up the field. Freer turns and sends a player racing in. He's a one-on-one with the keeper, and he just missed the post. That was Marcus Perez, just missed the post. I thought he was going to put that one in the net as he broke behind the defender and one-on-one with Ponce and kind of had him frozen. And his kick with a real open, gaping open net, and he just missed the open net. 29-47. Mount Pleasant 1, the Wildcats 0. We're in the second half. Just a penalty kick, the difference in this one. Mount Pleasant put that one in. And the Tigers have it at the midline after the Wildcats kicked it out of there. And there's a deep kick from Mount Pleasant. Again, they send a player down the right side. This time he's pretty well marked, and he let it slip away from him and go across the end line. Goal kick for the Wildcats. Noe Ponce will have to chase that one down and then bring it back to the box. David Marino checks back in after being given a yellow card as he ran into a Mount Pleasant player, and the official ruled that he was the offending player. Matthew Johnson will check out. Goal kick for Noe Ponce at 28:55. Wildcats trail 1-0. Here's Ponce's kick from the ground, and it comes off of Salazar. He heads it. Now Mount Pleasant will chip it in. Davian Ramirez got a header on it there. But Mount Pleasant now on the attack. They send a player down the right side, kick toward the middle, and toward the goal. Ponce will come up and field it on a couple of hops. I don't think that was headed on goal. It was kind of in the direction of the goal, but looked like it was heading wide. Ponce with the kick goes off a Mount Pleasant player back to Salazar. And the Wildcats move it up the field. Now it's kicked deep into Mount Pleasant territory and goes into their 18. And keeper, who is Sunderland, will pick it up for Mount Pleasant and gets a nice kick out of there. Header by Mount Pleasant. Omar Hernandez heading back, but Mount Pleasant pried the ball loose. And here they maneuver down. Broken up by the Wildcats, but another Mount Pleasant player coming up. Mount Pleasant trying to get open for a shot. Here's a pass, a shot actually blocked. Over to the near side, the Wildcat player was knocked off his feet. And the official just, no, he's coming over. I take that back, and I think he's going to, now send a Mount Pleasant player off with a yellow card. Yes. And so a yellow card foul, that one on Brian Ramirez. Boy, a vicious tackle on Nabian Ramirez. I tell you, this has been a very physical ball game. Not for the faint at heart here. It's a game for the men. Leave the boys behind today. It's a tough ball game. Free kick for the Wildcats. And again, Noe Ponce will take the kick for the Wildcats. He'll have to do a sprint to get back to the goal. He better make sure he doesn't kick it right on the Mount Pleasant player's foot. And he found a good player to send it to there, Rubio. Down to Salazar and on to Yanez. Good passing by the Wildcats. Broken up, though, by Mount Pleasant, but knocked back to Salazar. He goes around a Mount Pleasant player. Oh, it went across the touchline. Throw in from Mount Pleasant. 27-18 left in the second half. Mount Pleasant with a 1-0 lead. They play awfully well with a 1-0 lead. We mentioned they beat Royce City 1-0 in their last game, and they also beat the Wildcats 1-0 in Mount Pleasant. So they get a lead and they can really get it in their teeth. The Wildcats some good defense on the far touchline, but Mount Pleasant trying to get the ball back. Players still trying to get control. The Wildcats come out of there with it nicely on defense. And they'll send it back to Nabian Ramirez. He kicks it down to Omar Hernandez. Omar knocked down and taken off his foot by Mount Pleasant. They have a player squirting in, and it's loose there, and Noe Ponce found the ball. Luckily, the Wildcats defenders did a good job of kind of screening off Mount Pleasant players where they couldn't get to that loose ball, and then Noe Ponce was able to get there. Nice booming kick by Noe Ponce. It goes off a Mount Pleasant player. It's right at the midline. Comes down to Yanez, and Mount Pleasant takes it away and kicks it off and across the near touchline. I'll tell you one thing, a big difference. Mount Pleasant has had better possession in this half, as they've been tough to get that ball away from. The Wildcats have not had the freedom that they had in the first half with the ball. Much tougher. Mount Pleasant's kind of turned it up a notch here, and they're really beginning to threaten the goal, and that can sometimes cause something to happen. As Mount Pleasant charged toward the goal, and they had a player charging down the field, but Noe Ponce made a good play. There was a foul call, or actually an offside on Mount Pleasant, and the Wildcats got a free kick out of it, and they now are in Mount Pleasant territory. And ball rolled to the touchline, Nabian Ramirez. He gets it down to Enrique Arellano. Arellano taken off his foot by Mount Pleasant. Kick toward Freer for Mount Pleasant up near the midline. Freer with some fancy footwork. What a great athlete he looks like. And again, down the left side, Mount Pleasant player coming in. Tried to find Freer in the middle of the field. He's trying to get open for a shot. The Wildcats pry it loose. They send it down the field to Yanez. He got around one player. Mount Pleasant comes up and gets control again. Player heading right up the middle, gaining some yardage. Kicked off of a Wildcats player. It's right on the near touchline. Kicked by the Wildcats. They try to keep it in bounds. They do. Here's Omar Hernandez. Omar on the fly. Taken off his foot by Mount Pleasant. Yanez moves in. And Mount Pleasant pries it loose again. Now they'll kick, have a player. Oh, he looked a mile offside, but the ball sailed by him and went out of bounds. So they didn't have to really even consider the offside call, but it looked like he was in well ahead of everybody, and including the ball. Here's a throw by the Wildcats. 24-12 left here in the second half, and Mount Pleasant leading 1-0. A PK, successful PK in the first half, and that's stood up so far in this soccer game. They'll try across the field. The Wildcats get there first, and they kick it down the field to Enrique Arellano. Enrique steaming down the touchline with a lot of speed, moving in beautifully, trying to get open. He's being marked vigorously down there by defenders, and he kicked and still moving. Boy, what a play by Enrique Arellano down there. Now taken away by Mount Pleasant. Oh, my. All good things must come to an end, but that was a real pretty 30 seconds or so. Here's a kick down the field. Leaks through players to the Wildcats, and they'll kick it off the base and actually crawled up into the visiting stands here at Prim. and it'll be a Mount Pleasant throw-in. We're at 23-11. Matthew Johnson checks in, Isaac Gutierrez, and also Ricardo Torres. They'll replace Omar Hernandez, Andrew Escobar, and also Rubio. And that's Miguel Rubio. Throw in for Mount Pleasant on the far touchline. Mount Pleasant leads 1-0. 22:45 left here in the second half. Ball kicked across the end line, and a goal kick now for Mount Pleasant. We have a score from Mount Pleasant. Lady Cats 1 and Mount Pleasant 1, as here's a corner kick and then headed just to the right of the goal. I think probably Jaybird and Chris are super fans, are probably in Mount Pleasant tonight watching the Lady Cats, and I believe that report came from them, maybe from Chris. 1-1 tie in the second half. How about those Lady Cats? And here's the kick out of the goal by Noe Ponce, and it's 1-0 here. The Wildcats a goal away from matching that score, but they haven't been able to match. Oh, Mount Pleasant with Freer blowing in there, but the ball got out in front of him a little bit, and Noe Ponce was able to grab that thing quickly. And Ponce will now an enormous punt out of there. Takes a huge artificial turf bounce. And then back into the Mount Pleasant defense. Oh, a turnover, and just as Ariano was on the move, he must have said that there must have been a foul on the play. Boy, I thought the defender had fallen on his own there, but the official said he had a little help. And a foul on the Wildcats. It looked like Ariano was going to be heading right toward that keeper, 1-on-1. But not to be. There's a free kick by Mount Pleasant and a header. Wildcats get it high in the air. Mount Pleasant has a player deep, and Noe Ponce went up mano-a-mano with that Perez there for Mount Pleasant, and he got the ball. There was a little bumping going on there, but the official, again, boys will be boys, and let that go. Nice kick, again, by Ponce into the Mount Pleasant defense. They kick it out, but it goes right to the Wildcats, but Mount Pleasant intercepts. And here they come, and now they're trying long passes. And here again is Perez moving in against Ponce, but he blocked the effort that the Mount Pleasant player could put toward the net, which wasn't much, as he was really trying to fly and catch up to the ball, but not much on it, and Ponce was able to handle it. Here's Nabian Ramirez, gets it down to Escobedo. Escobedo sends it further down to Yanez. Yanez looking for some time and space. Oh, he got it down low to Rubio, but then kicked out of bounds by Mount Pleasant. Rubio grabbing his head there. And now the Wildcats throw it in quickly. Comes to Escobedo. Gets it back to Yanez, and he kicks. It's right out in front. It comes to a Wildcat. Oh, too much on it. Hit the left upright on the football goal post. So that's way over the soccer goal. As shot there by Jose Salazar. So a goal kick from Mount Pleasant at 19:35, but some encouraging signs for the Wildcats. This game opening up a little bit as the team's playing a little bit less defensively and trying to go for more out there, and we're beginning to see some chances. Here's Ricardo Torres. He gets it down to Kevin Yanez, lost to Mount Pleasant though. Some fancy footwork by the Tigers, as that was done by Francisco Equaway. I think Wa like Chihuahua. I think that's Equawa. A foul on the Wildcats, and free kick for Mount Pleasant now. 18:47. And there's a thundering Mount Pleasant kick toward the 18, headed out by the Wildcats. And everything looking large all of a sudden, kicks and headers and everything. Wildcats trying to come out of there with it. Nice effort by the Wildcats. I think that might be Matthew Johnson in pursuit, taken off his foot by Mount Pleasant. And hold everything. The official had called a foul on Mount Pleasant. The Wildcats with a free kick. and they send it across the midline. And Yanez tried to work that far sideline, went out of bounds off the Wildcats, and throw in for Mount Pleasant at 18:04. Only a PK, the difference in this one. Boy, you hate to see one decided on a PK, but it was a clear violation. There was nothing cheap about that. And now we come to the edge of the 18-yard box, and again, Noe Ponce grabs that ball. Somebody may have kind of brushed over him as they went by, maybe stepped on him or something. And Ponce a little slow in getting up. The official checking on him. And Noe looks ready to go here. He puts the ball down at the inside the 18-yard box. Free kick for Noe Ponce. At 17:23, Mount Pleasant 1 and Wildcats 0. There's a kick by Noe Ponce. And again, the Lady Cats are tied with Mount Pleasant 1-1 in the second half. That's exactly what happened here. And then the Lady Tigers won in overtime here at Gerald Prim Stadium back in February. Wildcats moving in and then knocked out of bounds by the defense for Mount Pleasant. And the Wildcats will have a throw-in deep in Mount Pleasant territory. There's Escobedo's throw-in and kicked out of there by Mount Pleasant. The Wildcat Salazar has it, and he kicks it back to Nabian Ramirez. Ramirez chips it down. There's a header by Escobedo. And then Mount Pleasant sends it to the center of the field toward Enrique Arellano. Yanez got it over to Isaac Gutierrez, and he sends it to Enrique Arellano, then kicked out of there by Mount Pleasant. They get it to Freer, and he lets a lot of traffic go by, and now he will kick it fairly deep, but goes off of David Marino, and Marino kicks it down the far touchline out of bounds, and it'll be Mount Pleasant ball. 16-11 left here in the second half, and Alexi Upton with 4 new players: Andrew Escobar, Diastado, that would be Alejandro Diastado. Also, the first appearance now by Daniel Marino, and Omar Hernandez also returned. So the toughness of Daniel Marino now in there for the Wildcats. The ball thrown in, and they'll kick it into the Mount Pleasant end. And they will a very deep kick off of a Wildcats defender. Mount Pleasant, the ball right on the near touchline. Torres tries to keep it in bounds, and Mount Pleasant tries to take it away. And they do. Oh, a beautiful foot pass and a kick, but missed the left post. And that player seizes his head, as that was Perez, as he got a beautiful foot pass. That backward foot pass from, I believe that was Freer. And then had a pretty good shot at an open goal and then just missed that left post. Oh, Perez has missed a post on the left and the right, so he's had some tough going in this one. And now a goal kick for Noe Ponce at 14:53, and the Wildcats trail only 1-0. Kick down the field, comes to Nabian Ramirez. He punches through it and gets it down the field, but taken by Mount Pleasant. And now Torres steps in there to challenge the Mount Pleasant player, but the Tigers passing it around. They'll head back toward their defense with a pass. Wildcats chasing and send it up the field. At Freer, he kind of makes it go for this Mount Pleasant team. And now a player right in the middle of the field kicks it further down, and Mount Pleasant will turn and have a player wide open in front of the keeper, and he kicked it and it hit the football crossbar. And so that is a dead football, as a dead ball, excuse me. It was the football crossbar, but it was a dead ball. And so a kick from the edge of the 6 now for Noe Ponce. 14 minutes left here in the second half. The Wildcats trailing 1-0. There's the kick out by Noe Ponce. And it comes down to Omar Hernandez. Omar on the move, tried to get around the Mount Pleasant defender, and they kicked it out of bounds. Throw in now for Ricardo Torres. Torres throws it in, but a Mount Pleasant player heads it. And they'll kick it down toward Freer at the midline. And he finds a player streaking in from the left side. Wildcats defense trying to catch up. And they do mark that player pretty well there. He can't get open for a shot. And they continue to dog him there. And he'll send it back out. And There's a header by the Wildcats, and it's going to end up going across the end line. That should set up a corner kick at 13-10 for Mount Pleasant. And they lead 1-0. Wonder if we had any other text tonight. Maybe some I've missed. Again, the Lady Cats won, Mount Pleasant won. And that's at, what do they call that? Sam Parker Field over in Mount Pleasant. Had some good memories of that place. They serve great food over there during football season. A bunch of their fans actually cook that stuff. Here's a throw in right toward the goal, and Noe Ponce is right there to take it for the Wildcats. Nice defensive work there. Good positioning by Noe Ponce, and Noe punts it out of there, and it comes down toward Diostado. Wildcats have it. They move it up to Yanez. He gets it down to Diostado. Diostado on the move, trying to open for a shot. Finds a teammate. His shot blocked. And Andrew Escobar will chase it over near the touchline. Andrew gets around one player, sends it further down to the edge of the right side of the box. Player maneuvering in, his pass intercepted Mount Pleasant. They'll kick it up the field toward Freer. And then he will look again to try that deep pass, and he does to Perez down there. And again, Ponce will win the race to the football right in front of a very frustrated Perez. Now the ball is thrown out to Salazar. And he kicks to Omar Hernandez, and he finds Yanez, and now goes on across to Gutierrez, taken away, though, by Mount Pleasant. The Tigers have possessed the ball much better here in the second half. And there's a pass broken up by Omar Hernandez, but Mount Pleasant got back to the ball, player being leaned on by the Wildcats, but they continue to complete some passes. And they just can't get open for a shot, and now they'll send it all the way to the far touchline. And there's a kick toward the goal, a big one-hopper right into Noe Ponce. And he will punt it out of there at 10:53, 1-0, Mount Pleasant with a lead. A nice kick. Now kick back toward the Wildcats. Comes down to Salazar. And he finds Diostado, Alejandro Diostado, off of a Mount Pleasant player. And now here's another deep kick as they're really trying to free Perez there. He maneuvers in, broken up by the Wildcats defense, and the ball is kicked, went off of a Mount Pleasant coach. And the Wildcats have a player back behind the play that, after that collision back there, is trying to shake something off. And they'll look after him. Noe Ponce came over, and now they help. That was Bryant Sanchez, and he's back on his feet. So he just had to shake that off. He had quite a collision with Perez, who I think did not like the fact that he got called for a foul on that, but obviously Sanchez felt that one. The clock has been stopped with the injured player at 10:22, and will start as soon as Noe Ponce puts the foot into this one from the ground. A header by Mount Pleasant comes to the Wildcats defender Sanchez, sends it down the field toward Daniel Marino. Marino burrowing in there. He reminds me of one of those Ford Hood tanks when I worked in the Killeen area. And here's a player coming in from the right side, and a kick toward the goal, and Noe Ponce is up to the task, and he rolls it out quickly toward Omar Hernandez. Hernandez down the field to Yanez. Ball worked over to Isaac Gutierrez, I believe that was him. And now it comes back over to Hernandez. Here's Omar on the fly. Omar moving in and works it over to Daniel Marino. He tries to maneuver in, taking off his foot, and now Mount Pleasant will get possession. But it's taken away there by Sanchez. He gets it over to Salazar, and they move it into Yanez. Yanez kicks toward the goal, partially blocked, went back to the keeper on 2 or 3 hops, and you saw several players after that happened reach down and kind of grab the shorts, and that's a sign of fatigue. as these players are really applying a lot of effort here. The Wildcats have the ball and send it all the way back to their keeper. Noe Ponce plays the ball from the ground, gets a nice kick from the ground. It'll hop over a Mount Pleasant player. It's on the near touch line, but Mount Pleasant has control. They move it across the touch line and will kick across the field, and they'll chip it further down the field. Headed out of there by the Wildcats. Mount Pleasant header is backwards, and the Wildcats trying to come out of the defensive end with a nice pass down to Daniel Marino. Marino burrowing in there. I'm telling you, just like one of those Abrams tanks. Now the ball coming in, a goal for the Wildcats. Wildcats get the goal. Andrew Escobar. Andrew may have come up scoreless in senior night, but he just put one in the net against Mount Pleasant to tie the score 1-1 at 8:17. So Andrew Escobar at 8:17, and it's 1-1 as the Wildcats, just as the Lady Cats are doing in Mount Pleasant, they've tied this match at 1-1 as just a kind of a perfect storm there of activities around the goal, and Escobar had the opportunity and put it into the net for the Wildcats. And now we're tied at 1, and Mount Pleasant has 8 minutes now to see if they can do something about it. The Wildcats also have that 8 minutes to see if they can pull off a really huge upset and try to beat this team for the first time in 13 years. And that is correct, folks. I hate to say that, but it has been a long drought for the Wildcats. And some really great Wildcat soccer players and teams over that. Of course, a lot of times we're not in the same district with them, but we've had them in the same district a lot of times, and then sometimes even when we weren't in the same district, we would play non-district and stuff. And that doesn't count those tournament games. Sometimes those are shortened. Now the ball's on the near touch line, and the Wildcats have it right around the midline. And Omar Hernandez will throw in toward Escobedo. But Mount Pleasant has it on the near touch line. They kick it down the field, and it's going to go out of bounds, and Nabian Ramirez will chase it down. And throw in for the Wildcats. And again, they'll use Omar Hernandez. 6:53 left in the contest, and we're tied 1-1. Wildcats get the equalizer, Andrew Escobar. And down the field it comes to Enrique Oriano. Oriano on the move, taken off his foot by Mount Pleasant. They'll kick it up, but David Marino steps in and gets it over to Salazar. He rolls it toward Omar Hernandez, but kicked into the Wildcats' end. And again, this is David Marino, but his kick is going to go across the touchline, throw in for Mount Pleasant in their own defensive end, but just by 10 yards or so. And throwing in will be Manuel Rosas. Substitution for Mount Pleasant. Looks like that dangerous Perez is back out there. If he's had a little breather, they've been trying to, in football parlance, go long to him in this game quite a bit, as they've tried to kick long and have him outrun everybody. And here's a guy that's been sending those long passes down. They get it down the field. That was Freer, but now the Wildcats take it back. And they work it to Salazar. Kick off of a Mount Pleasant player. Again, the Wildcats are doing some real good back checking, bumping those Mount Pleasant players off the ball. Perez now sends a player down the right side, moving in against Omar Hernandez, moving it toward the goal. A kick, Noe Ponce up to the task. And one of the Wildcats threw his hands up in the air after that great save by Noe Ponce. I think that might have been Nabian Ramirez. And there's the kick out, and the Mount Pleasant header comes down to Omar Hernandez, works over to Yanez. Yanez tries to split a couple of Mount Pleasant players, squirts out of bounds, and throw in for Mount Pleasant. At 4:56, we look like we're destined maybe for a little OT here. But we still have almost 5 minutes left to play, so we'll see. Now the Wildcats with the ball, Escobedo, but taken off his foot. And here comes Mount Pleasant, but Escobedo has not stopped trying to get that ball back. Down the field it comes. Mount Pleasant sending a player in from the right side with a lot of speed, moving in. And here's a kick, and then a headed out of there by the Wildcats. Good defense. And the Wildcats kick it up the field toward Escobedo. Yanez settles it down, sends it across the field. There's that man Escobar. He's the goal scorer for the Wildcats. Kicks it down the field. Wildcats trying to get it back. Mount Pleasant under pressure. Back in their own defensive end. 4:08 left in the contest. The Wildcats and Mount Pleasant tied at 1. Long kick. It's going to be directed to the left of the goal. And Noe Ponce keeps it inbounds and then kicks it out of there. Players grappling for the ball. The Wildcats chipped it up near the midline. And we had a foul called on the Wildcats, so a free kick coming about 50 yards out from the goal, just dead on the goal. But a strong-legged player from Mount Pleasant. Let's see if he chips to the edge of the 18 or goes for the whole enchilada. And he will send it goalward there, but headed out by the Wildcats. And another header. Freer kicks it toward the goal, but blocked by the Wildcats, blocking it out of there. On the far touchline, it goes across that touchline. Throw in for the Wildcats at 3:10. A quick throw in for the Wildcats as they maneuver in toward the Mount Pleasant goal. Hard work there by the Wildcats on that far touchline. They'll send it toward the middle. Escobar in there mixing it up. Wildcats continuing to maneuver in there. Now it's back to the far touchline. Chipped up the field, but the Wildcats have it. And trying to maneuver there. Player moving in there. Continuing to move in, but finally to the Mount Pleasant defense, they'll kick it out of there. Nice header, Escobar. Comes down to Yanez. Sends it to Omar Hernandez. Omar kicks toward the goal. A one-hopper. Swallowed up there by Sunderland at 2:27. And Yanez needs some attention as Tammy Carroll's going to trot out and take a look at Kevin Yanez as the official. The way he's holding his leg, sometimes they do that for a cramp. Now they're helping Kevin up to his feet. And we have a timeout for this injury, player timeout, but Kevin Yanez is back on his feet. I think he's trying to evaluate if he can continue. And he continues to stand right in that spot where they picked him up. And he's walking slowly to try to see how everything feels there. And so Kevin Yanez, really a big part of this Wildcats team, is making his way toward the bench under his own power, by the way, but slowly. Crowd giving him a good hand. And a goal kick for Mount Pleasant when we get started, and there's the kick. It sails over some players, comes down to Freer. Taken off his foot by the Wildcats, but he gets it back. And now the Wildcats pry it loose again. But Mount Pleasant comes down with it again, and they sends it back to Freer. Freer trying to open for a shot. Passes back to a teammate as they work the ball around. 2 minutes left here in the second half, and we're tied at 1. Mount Pleasant works to the edge of the box. They chip to a teammate coming in, send it across the end line. Goal kick for the Wildcats with less than, about 1:46 and counting in the second half. Wildcats won and Mount Pleasant won as the Wildcats tied it up at 8:17. Andrew Escobar with a big goal for the Wildcats. And here's Noe Ponce, kicks from the edge of the 6 from the ground. It scoots over players and heads toward the touchline. The Wildcats kicked it down the field and across out of bounds, so a throw in for Mount Pleasant, fairly deep in their territory as that was kicked pretty deep. And Mount Pleasant quickly puts it in play with 1:11, all that's left here in the second half. It's beginning to smell a little bit like overtime here. Mount Pleasant trying to come out of the defensive end, but anything can happen in the last minute. Now Escobedo takes the ball away, gets it back to Salazar, but his pass intercepted by Mount Pleasant. But look at Rubio. Boy, he's in there bumping that Mount Pleasant guy. And the Wildcats again working hard to pry that ball loose, but Mount Pleasant very hard to pry the ball from. They send it down the field, and a player coming in from the right side. It's a kick toward the middle, goes past Mount Pleasant players, and the Wildcats kick it down the field. But Mount Pleasant comes up quickly. 28 seconds, all that's left. Kick blocked by the Wildcats. It's on the far touchline. Player just brutalizing Enrique Arellano, and finally got the foul. Only 16 seconds left to play, and Freer kind of throws the ball away from the Wildcats. If you did that in basketball, they'd call that they would call that delay of game. And now Alexi Upton's wondering why they've let the clock just completely roll out here, and that's going to do it for the second half. And we are tied at 1-1 at the end of regulation. Again, Mount Pleasant scored in the first half on a goal by Alex Guzman on a penalty kick after a Mount Pleasant forward was fouled in the box. Penalty kick by Alex Guzman was good on the penalty kick, and that was at 30-12 of the first half, 1-0. Then in the second half, Andrew Escobar, the equalizer at 8:17, put the ball in the net for the Wildcats. And right now, Escobar walked up to his head coach, Alexi Upton, and Alexi patted him on the head, and they had a little man hug down there of excitement after that big Escobar goal. And I bet Alexi really wanted him to get one after he left senior night, being the only senior to not score, but he hit the post and did everything else but score. And now they're having the meeting that's going to take place here out in the middle to decide all the stuff. I see David Marino coming out there for the Wildcats. Let's take the break before we head into the first half of overtime, which I guarantee one of my favorite newspaper reporters that I know around here tomorrow in the paper is going to call it double overtime. It's not, but that's what we're going to hear. Well, before we go away, let's see if we've got an update on the Lady Cats. Oh my, folks, hold on to your hats. Lady Cats 2, Mount Pleasant Lady Tigers 1, and I don't know if that's a final. Lady Cats 2, Mount Pleasant 1, and that's either late in the second half or it's a final, but we do not know. All we know, the Lady Cats lead there in the second half. As we get a clarification, we'll let you know. Let's take a break here. We'll come back with the first half of overtime right after this. Back in a moment. Just seconds away from the beginning of the first half of overtime. Overtime is defined as two halves. So we will play two halves of overtime here. That's what overtime includes. I think they're 5 minutes a pop. Coach Neal knows over there, Josh Neal. Oh, he put 10 minutes up there. Maybe two 10-minute halves here. I forget from time to time, although it hadn't been all that long when we had an overtime. Wildcats gathered around. Boy, they've played with great energy tonight. Just wonder, I hope they have something else left in the tank. Noe Pont's kind of limping around out there a little bit. I hope he's doing fine. Made a great save on Mount Pleasant. Caused Nabian Ramirez to shoot his arms up in the air and celebrate. Great save by his teammate there back in goal. Mount Pleasant is back on the field. The teams have changed directions that they were heading. They'll go back to the way they were in the first half, which certainly worked out well with the Wildcats. They looked awfully good. Just had that one mistake where they fouled the forward in the box. The Wildcats will start with possession of the ball in this first half of overtime. And we're tied at 1. And again, the Lady Cats leading in Mount Pleasant. And we did get a clarification on that as the second half, so it's not over yet. But Lady Cats leading Mount Pleasant 2-1. And now the Wildcats start with possession of the ball. And Yanez is back out there too, so that's good to see. And his pass goes out of bounds, throw in for Mount Pleasant on the far touchline. Ball knocked out of bounds, another Mount Pleasant throw in coming. As I would imagine they really have the Tigers' attention now. We're going to get their best shot, I would think, here in this overtime. Here's a player maneuvering in, but the flag goes up, so an offside call on Mount Pleasant. The Wildcats will get a free kick out of this. Always like when a player can get a kick out of it. Right, James Terry, who is our resident punster. He's world-class punster, by the way. Here's a kick by Noe Ponce up around the midline. And there's a bicycle kick for the Wildcats, and they're maneuvering down the far touchline with the player moving in fast and then knocked across the touchline. Oh, throw in to Mount Pleasant. My goodness. Okay, throw in for the Tigers. Wildcats kick it back into their defense, try to get something going. It's right on the touchline. They'll kick it down the field to Yanez. Finds a teammate, and a kick goes off of a Mount Pleasant player, and he'll kick it up the field. But taken by the Wildcats, they get it over to Rubio, over toward Escobar, but taken away Mount Pleasant. Here come the Tigers at 8:24 of overtime. We'll kick it over to the right side. Mount Pleasant player burrowing in, hits the deck, no call. The Wildcats have it, and they'll work the far touchline. And we'll kick it down the field. Nice pass down there to Yanez, but he hit the back of a Mount Pleasant player. Ball on the far touchline, out of bounds. Last touch, Mount Pleasant. Throw in Wildcats. Under 8 to play in overtime now. We're tied at 1. Kick down the field for the Wildcats. They tried to work the far touchline, kicked it out of bounds. Throw in Mount Pleasant. And now the ball on the far touchline. Header by the Wildcats. Right on that touchline. Wildcat header. All the action taking place on the other side of the field right now. The Wildcats continue to work that left side. And the Wildcats maneuvering in. The ball knocked out of bounds by Mount Pleasant. Can't help but remember when they would have been going through some standing water over there on that far side. Always, constantly had Lake Prim over there on that far side. Boy, not anymore. This is a beautiful facility now with this artificial turf. Ball again on the far touchline. The Wildcats maneuver it now toward the middle of the field, and they'll send it over to Rubio. Rubio moving in. He drew 3 Mount Pleasant players, gets it down pretty low. And the Wildcats continuing to move in there, and Enrique Arellano really fighting hard out there. And now Mount Pleasant gets it up near the midline, but the Wildcats chip it right back down. And it takes a big high hop header by Mount Pleasant, and they'll kick it up near the midline. Mount Pleasant sends it into Wildcats territory. David Marino got there and kicks it over to Salazar. Salazar splits a couple of players and got it to a teammate, and they'll work it over to Rubio and back to Yanez, and he finds Bryant Sanchez, who now kicks it down the field. Went off Andrew Escobar. The Wildcats are chasing. That's Enrique Arellano, sends it over into the corner. Mount Pleasant has sent it across the touchline. Throw in for the Wildcats deep in Mount Pleasant territory. We're under 6 to play here in overtime. We're in session 1 of overtime, and we're getting another text here. Overtime tied 2-2. My goodness, the Lady Cats looked like they were going to be victorious, or they were close to it, but Mount Pleasant has tied the game at 2, and that's headed for overtime just like here. So 2-2 in Mount Pleasant with the Lady Cats, 1-1 with Mount Pleasant here with the Wildcats. Boy, to have a 2-1 lead in Mount Pleasant, that had to be very disappointing to give up that tying goal. But you know Mount Pleasant threw everything they had at them to try to get the equalizer there. Mount Pleasant has not lost on the women's side, or the girls' side. They have not lost to anybody but Royce City in district play. And now Salazar is being helped off the field. He's actually walking on his own, but Tammy Carroll is nearby there to watch him. And he checks out of the game. Remember, we saw Yanez come off tentatively, and he came right back, so we'll hope for the best also for Salazar. Throw in for the Wildcats, and then the ball goes out of bounds, and it'll go back for a goal kick for Mount Pleasant. At 5:50 left in overtime, and we're tied 1-1. Mount Pleasant a first half goal, the Wildcats a second half goal, and now we're in overtime. Sunderland with a kick out of goal. Nice header by the Wildcats. Mount Pleasant back in their own territory, and again passing in among their defenders. And they do that well. They can really come up the field with that good passing from defenders. They work the ball up the field. The Wildcats pry it loose. Wildcat knocked down on the play, and he did pick up the foul. Foul on Mount Pleasant. Free kick right around the midline. And let's see who will take it here. I believe that'll be David Marino. Marino kicks it down the field, chested down. Here's a kick on the goal for the Wildcats. That was to the right of the goal. Off goal. So a goal kick for Mount Pleasant at 4:35. Sometime the brain registers and the tongue doesn't work. And that happened that time. 4:35. Here's a kick down the field to Bryant Sanchez, and he will kick it up into the Prim stands here on the home side. And a Mount Pleasant player, that ball came right back down to him as we're at 4:12. A Mount Pleasant throw in. They're in Wildcats territory, but the Wildcats kick it out of there. Mount Pleasant beginning to send their players up a little bit. Wildcats pry it loose. And here's a kick down the field by Rubio. Mount Pleasant has it, and again, they'll kick it across the field on defense. And a whistle blows, and one of the Wildcats again is down as their players falling, having a lot of trouble here, and some of them have come back. Now, this is Yanez again. So Kevin is really leaving it all on the field, and he's not coming out this time. He is hanging in there and staying. So the Wildcats, they have given every ounce of their energy tonight. Long kick by Mount Pleasant. A couple of headers by the Wildcats. And settle down, and Yanez just back into the action. Probably doesn't even remember that he was down just a moment ago. Mount Pleasant now moving in. Taken away by the Wildcats. It goes into the Mount Pleasant defense. They're all the way up to the midline now, really pressing. Ball on the far touchline for the Wildcats. Kicked off of a Mount Pleasant player. Throw in for the Wildcats at 2:55 left to go here in the overtime, first half of overtime, and we're tied at 1. Out of bounds off the Wildcats. Mount Pleasant throw in. Went off of Wildcats' back and kicked off of a Mount Pleasant player, but ball stays in bounds. Mount Pleasant has it. They'll kick to the middle of the field. A thundering kick toward the goal went off of Noe Ponce's hand, and Noe is really having trouble with his feet. Looked like his feet are kind of sore tonight. He's getting around gingerly back there, but he had enough hop that time to knock it out of bounds. But it sets up a corner kick now for Mount Pleasant, and here it's right out in front, goes across to the right side. Mount Pleasant trying to maneuver and kicked it off of a Wildcat player, and then the flag goes up from the flag official on the far side, and a penalty against Mount Pleasant. And the Wildcats' Noe Ponce will limp back, and now he will approach the ball and kick it off the ground for the Wildcats. And Noe puts the foot into it, comes down to a Wildcat, and they get it up around the midline. And the Wildcats get it across the midline now. And again, Kevin Yanez with the left foot down the field. Settled down there by the Wildcats. Escobedo, I believe, back to Yanez. And Kevin with the left foot down to Escobedo. Kicked it off a Mount Pleasant player. Comes over to Miguel Rubio. Rubio, a thundering kick, but that was too much on that one, as it went all the way over that back fence back there. Probably on the park road for Buford Park there. And just less than a minute, 55 seconds and counting. And the official's going to stop the clock as they need a soccer ball. Does anybody have a soccer ball at the soccer game? Now one comes flying in. And they'll send it back to the Mount Pleasant keeper so he can do a goal kick here. They stopped the clock at 45 seconds. And then we're in the first overtime. We're tied at 1. Lady Cats in Mount Pleasant. From Mount Pleasant, they're tied at 2 in overtime. Enrique Arellano, a kick. That was well to the right of the goal. It went underneath the scoreboard. Another goal kick for Mount Pleasant with 30 seconds left. Kick out of there, headed by Mount Pleasant. Wildcats trying to get something going, but so's Mount Pleasant. Freer had it taken off his foot by Andrew Escobar. Escobar's pass blocked, and now he kicks it down the field to Enrique Arellano, one-on-one with a defender. Enrique trying to get around him, and that defender trying to control the ball. There's just 7 seconds left. It squeaks across the end line, and it'll be a Mount Pleasant throw-in, and that's going to do it. That's going to wrap up the first half of overtime. We play a scoreless first half of overtime. So the first half of overtime, we're tied 1-1. So we'll have another brief break here and come back and try another 10-minute session, and we will play it all. This is not sudden death, not like the NFL or something where you score and that's the game. We will play this one to the bitter end, all 10 minutes here, and I hope it's not a bitter end. I don't know why I even said that. Let's take a break here, and we'll come back with a second half of overtime right after this break. Mount Pleasant is returning to the field for the second half of overtime. And the Wildcats are still around Alexi Upton, who is giving them his best Newt Rockney speech down there. You have to look him up. I do not remember Newt Rockney. That was, of course, if you saw Ronald Reagan, he was the Gipper. Win one for the Gipper. And George Gipp, I believe, was his name. They called him the Gipper. And anyway, Newt Rockney was our legendary coach. That probably goes back to the 1920s, and I know I do appear ancient sometimes, so I don't go back quite that far. Mount Pleasant will now start with possession of the ball here in the second half of overtime, and we're tied at 1-1. And the Lady Cats and Mount Pleasant are tied 2-2 at Sam Parker Stadium in Mount Pleasant. And we appreciate Christopher Betts is providing us with scores from that game, and I'm sure he and the Jaybird, I'm not sure I could tell you Jay's last name. People know him. He works at Brookshire's. And anyway, let's get back to soccer here at 9:34 now. And Mount Pleasant has the ball again back in their defense. I just keep thinking there's going to break down one time and have one of those fatal passes, and the Wildcats will make them pay. But we're still waiting on that. As Mount Pleasant trying to come out of their defensive end. A sliding defensive play by the Wildcats. It looked like he pried it loose, but they very seldom allow you to get away with that. That's a very dangerous play. But they very seldom let you do that, even if you pry the ball loose, seems like. There's a deep kick, went off the Wildcats, kicked out of there by Omar Hernandez. Now a thundering kick by Mount Pleasant, well to the right of the goal. That frustrated Perez, I think, who's missed post. He has missed the right post and the left post where he had an open goal. And now Noe Ponce from the edge of the 6 will kick from the ground and kicks it out of there. Comes down to Gutierrez, and he works it down to Rubio, and he sends it down to Escobedo. Escobedo kicks it back to Gutierrez, to Yanez, and Kevin to Omar Hernandez, kicks it off Escobedo. Wildcats pretty good possession here. And Gutierrez moving in, down to Yanez. Yanez moving it toward the goal, and then Mount Pleasant got to it first and blasted it across the near touchline here. Throw in for the Wildcats, Omar Hernandez, as we're tied at 1. In the second half of overtime, back to Omar, now kicked up the field down to Nabian Ramirez, and he gets it over to Gutierrez. Finds Rubio. Rubio's kick off of a Mount Pleasant player, and now Mount Pleasant gets it, and they're in a big hurry. They kick it down the field. The Wildcats defense chasing. I think Freer's going to get there first. He's trying to open for a shot. Wildcats have him double teamed, and they took the ball right off his foot, and they give it to Yanez. Kevin Yanez with a back tap. Now he goes back and gets the ball. He's fighting off a defender, and a Mount Pleasant foul is called. Free kick for the Wildcats. And it's going to be about 5 yards from the midline for the Wildcats. And David Marino, excuse me, I did it again. David Marino with a kick for the Wildcats. There's a kick down the field. Goes off of players, comes down to Escobedo, sends a player in on the right side, sent it too far for that player to get up to it. And it'll be a goal kick for Mount Pleasant with 6:40, and we're 6:40 away from PKs here to decide this one. As Salazar checks back in, and he'll replace Rubio. Rubio had some good moments out there. And there's a kick by Mount Pleasant, headed by the Wildcats. And foul on that header, so Mount Pleasant will now get a free kick, and they thunder it down the field. And the ball settled down by Mount Pleasant. Player turns and shoots toward the goal, but well to the left of the goal. Noe Ponce, watch that one sail to the left. And Ponce will now, let's see if he tries to punt this. He'll kick from the ground, and he will kick it down the field. Mount Pleasant with a header, and they've got control as, again, they're pushing up a little bit and back to the midline. Wildcats will kick, or the Mount Pleasant will kick to the near touch line, taken away, though, by the Wildcats. And Omar Hernandez kicked off one of his teammates. Mount Pleasant chases it down. They have a player in the middle of the field, and they'll try the left side. And they'll go to the left touch line. Player moving in, taken off his foot by the Wildcats, but it's going to, they kept it in bounds. And now kick back toward the Wildcats, and they kick it out of there. Mount Pleasant trying to settle it down. Couldn't get a shot off, but sent it over near the near touch line here. And they pass back to the defender. And he'll go across the field. The Wildcats pressing. Goes across to the touch line. Mount Pleasant in. They kick it down, and the Wildcats break it up. They kick it out of there, right in the middle of the field for Mount Pleasant. And they'll try the near touch line here. A back kick, back pass, and now Mount Pleasant, they couldn't control the ball. It went across the end line. Goal kick for Noe Ponce and the Wildcats at 4:28. That's all the overtime that we have left here. And now checking in for the Wildcats is Christian Ramirez is in there. And Christian has foregone the face mask. No, he's got it on. I take that back. I just caught a flash of it. And there's a kick on the way, headed by Mount Pleasant and headed by the Wildcats over to Omar Hernandez, who lets it settle down. Omar on the move and kicks it down the field off of a Mount Pleasant player, and they thunder it down the field. Goes off a Mount Pleasant player, back into the defense to Nabian Ramirez, who rolls it to Noe Ponce, and he'll kick from the ground. And a header for Mount Pleasant comes down to Christian Ramirez, and the Wildcats kick it further down the field. Now Mount Pleasant sends it back into the Wildcats' end. One of the Wildcats knocked over. They let that go. And Mount Pleasant has it, and they're in the Wildcats' territory. Went off a Nabian Ramirez header by Mount Pleasant. A player open, but his shot partially blocked. Another one heads it to the player. It squirts out of there, and Noe Ponce picked it up. And again, he looks like Hopalong Cassidy back there. My goodness. Well, that's an old Western reference, and I imagine nobody caught that unless you're at least 60 plus, maybe 65 even, maybe 70. A kick down the field and a foul on Mount Pleasant. 2:54. Yeah, that was an old Saturday Western. You might see those in reruns, might know who he is. And here comes the Wildcats in the final 3 minutes of the second half of overtime. Down the field it goes, and a foul on the Wildcats trying to get a header, and now Mount Pleasant with a free kick. 2:30, all that's left. We're 2:30 from going into penalty kicks here. Oh, now Omar Hernandez, right to a Mount Pleasant guy. This is that Perez. Ball taken off his leg, but they call a foul on Christian Ramirez. They said to get that ball. Christian thought he made a good play. Made an appeal, immediately denied by the official, who stared him back down 30 yards down the field. Now that's a stare, I'm telling you. Here's a free kick for Mount Pleasant out about 45 yards, and the kick on the way, and it's headed out by the Wildcats. It's high in the air down there out in front, headed out by the Wildcats. They chase, and now they'll kick it further down the field. Mount Pleasant turning and chasing, and this is Escobedo down there. But Mount Pleasant kicks it forward, and now taken by Omar Hernandez. Omar on the move. Omar with a left foot, and his kick hit the crossbar. Oh, my, it's still a loose ball. And the Wildcats try to get to it, but the keeper got there first. Oh, my, Omar hit the crossbar. He almost put that in from distance. And now here comes Mount Pleasant, last 118, and now they're pressing the issue. The Wildcats send it across the near touchline. Mount Pleasant, they'll kick it down back toward the edge of the 18-yard box. Player maneuvering in, will kick toward the goal, blocked by Noe Ponce. Wildcats defense has it. They direct it to the side. 55 seconds, all that's left. There's a kick down the touchline. Mount Pleasant kept it in bounds and kicks toward the goal, headed out by the Wildcats. Comes down to Escobedo. He's on the move, knocked all the way to the ground. And Coach Upton says, how can you allow that? And he doesn't. He called a foul. A lot of times the coaches will react immediately, and the official will take a little bit longer to make that signal. They've already got the call in mind. They just take a little bit longer to make the signal. Free kick for the Wildcats. Just 20 seconds left before we're heading to PKs. And they're going to have to hurry. Boy, they've taken an inordinate amount of time. They've only got 13 seconds now as David Marino will kick the ball for the Wildcats. And it's headed out of there. Mount Pleasant trying to get it here, and they'll kick it down the field. They have a player racing after it. And now it's going to be kicked up into the cheap seats there. That cleared the, no it didn't. It hit up in the visiting stands as we hit 0-0. So both overtime period, well, actually, there I go. Even I'm as bad now. Both halves of overtime, one overtime, by the way, ends up with nothing. Neither team scored, and we're going to have penalty kicks here from Gerald Prim Stadium. Seemed like it's been several years ago. I'm pretty sure it was Mount Pleasant, and that game went into penalty kicks before Mount Pleasant won it. I think technically, in your season record, I need Andy Holt. I need him here to advise me on this. I think you can, and actually, in your season record, Mike could count this as a tie. But this is perhaps a district decision to use penalty kicks to decide ties, so that you don't end up with a whole bunch of ties on your record. But both teams will score a point. Nobody will get 3 points out of this. I don't know that that's going to make. I think Upton getting 1 point on Mount Pleasant, that's going to help his cause. because they have not. I don't think they've yielded a point to anybody. I'd have to go back and check their record to see if they're 8 out of their 8 wins, if any others were done in PKs. Let's take one break here, and we'll come back with the start of the penalty kicks right after this break. More in a moment. We're tied as we head to the penalty kick part of the game here, and we're tied at 1-1, Sulphur Springs and Mount Pleasant. Back in a moment. Again, Christopher Betts reporting from Sam Parker Field in Mount Pleasant. They've played the first half of overtime, and they are still tied, the Lady Cats 2 and Mount Pleasant 2 in Mount Pleasant. And here, after 2 halves of overtime, a complete overtime, and just one, by the way, it's the Wildcats 1 and Mount Pleasant 1. And so we're getting ready for penalty kicks now, and Alexi Upton is selecting his crew. I think he's decided who, and they've also made a strategic decision. We've been talking about how Noe Ponce has kind of been limping around here tonight, and they have removed him from the goal. He just looks like he cannot move. And so Eleazar Brina is going to be the keeper for the Wildcats. And now the Mount Pleasant kickers are coming out, and we'll certainly try to identify these fellows as we can. Mount Pleasant's numbers are extremely hard to read. I see some of their, I would imagine that Perez will be out there, and I would imagine I look like Sunderland. Again, the Mount Pleasant keeper, he's going to keep him in there. And Brenna. And here comes the first Mount Pleasant kicker, and let's see if we can get a number on him. He would be a 19. So this will be, Guzman. Well, of course. Guzman had the first goal for Mount Pleasant on, guess what, a penalty kick. But now he's working against Eleazar Brenna in goal for the Wildcats. And so Brenna in the goal, and now the official is telling him where he can stand and giving him final instructions. And then Guzman, again his first name Alex Guzman with the penalty kick against Brenna. And I think I'm not sure how many kickers we're going to have. I don't know if it's 5 or 6. And here's the first kick on the way, and it's put into the net. And Mount Pleasant's kick is good. So 1-0, and this looks like David Marino. And that would indeed be David. And he has a chance to tie it up here for the Wildcats. Working against Matthew Sunderland, the goalkeeper for Mount Pleasant. So let's see how David plays it here. And now he approaches, and the kick is blocked by Sunderland. So it remains 1-0. And next up for Mount Pleasant now. And again, he is just walking as straight as he can without revealing his number. He takes that ball. Oh, that's a number 5. What I got, Doug. This is Brian Ramirez. So Ramirez now with a penalty kick. Mount Pleasant leads 1-0 in penalty kicks, and this one is in the net. Brenna dived to the left trying to anticipate, and the kick, or to his left, and the kick went to his right. So 2-0 on the kicks for Mount Pleasant. And now Andrew Escobar for the Wildcats. He's already down 2-0 in PK, so they need to make a comeback here. And Andrew Escobar for the Wildcats. And Andrew approaches, and his kick is blocked by Sunderland. He is 2 for 2. Oh, that is unbelievable. Mount Pleasant still up 2-0. They look like you tell me they're going to get out of here on penalty kicks tonight? Oh, my goodness. Here's Freer. I recognize him anywhere. And he's the next kicker for Mount Pleasant. They're up to 2-0. They've made both of theirs. Wildcats have been blocked twice. And this is Tony Freer. And Freer on the approach, and his kick is in the net. And he went, that time Brenna dived to his right, and Freer kicked back where he vacated. So 3-0 for Mount Pleasant. And here is Omar Hernandez. So the Wildcats down 3-0. And the Wildcats running out of opportunity here. So Omar Hernandez with the penalty kick with the left foot. And Omar puts it into the net for the Wildcats. And that'll make it 3-1 on the penalty kicks. And let's see, next for Mount Pleasant. Some very bright shoes for this kicker. And walking down there to get ready for his penalty kick here. Yeah, let's see if he... Boy, he is just not going to give us a look at that number at all. It may be a 6. And here's the kick from Mount Pleasant into the net. And I think that was Edgar Ramirez. And that's going to do it. Mount Pleasant will win on penalty kicks by the score of 4-1. They did not miss a one. And the Wildcats got blocked 3 times before Omar Hernandez made the kick. And Mount Pleasant wins on PKs. So I think you score this one as a 2-1 win for Mount Pleasant on penalty kicks. And Mount Pleasant will pick up 2 points instead of 3. I don't know that that'll make a difference. They have defeated everybody in district play. And they beat, I imagine Greenville is probably right behind them with a couple of losses, so losing a point will not hurt them too terribly bad. And the Wildcats will pick up a point, which will certainly help their cause as they try to move into 3rd place, and help them as they try to move around Lindale, as they have kind of broken even with Lindale. I don't know if you ever get to where you consider a goal differential, because if that would happen, Lindale won 4-0 here. The Wildcats won 3-2 at Tyler Junior College near Lindale. And so anyway, this one's going to end. The Wildcats lose to the Mount Pleasant Tigers, and it was done on penalty kicks. And I'm going to score it as 2-1, and I'm not sure if you continue that. It was 4-1 in penalty kicks, but I think you just get the extra point for winning the PKs. And Mount Pleasant wins this one by scoring more penalty kicks after the game ended in a tie in regulation and overtime. So a thrilling soccer game, and my goodness, the Wildcats played well tonight. They really played one of the best teams in our region, and I think Alexi Upton will have a lot of praise for his team and the way they played tonight. And we are getting closed on with the curtains here, so it's curtains for us here in the booth. And so let's go ahead and wrap this one up. I ought to talk for another 15 minutes, to be honest with you, but I just think I'll go ahead and wrap it up since they've closed the curtains on us here at Gerald Prim Stadium. It kind of reminds me of when a maintenance man one time turned off the lights when we were interviewing Andy Holt so he could get out of here. And so somebody that's in a big hurry to leave the press box has closed the curtains on us. And so we'll wrap it up and go ahead and bid everybody adieu here. James Terry running spots back at the station, Doug Haston with their engineering and shooting the video, and you'll want to see this one. A fantastic contest that Mount Pleasant wins on penalty kicks after the game ended in a 1-1 tie in regulation and overtime. I'm Don Julian with your play-by-play, and the last we heard from Mount Pleasant was Lady Cats 2 and Mount Pleasant 2, and they had played one half of overtime and had one more overtime session to go in that one. And so we will have that score online as soon as we can get it tonight. And I'm Don Julian with your play-by-play. Thank you for joining us, and so long, everybody.
Thank you, Don Julian. This is KSST 1230 AM, Sulphur Springs, your official Wildcat and Lady Cat station. We'll go back to Good Time Oldies after this message.